Hey, we're here for our Beyond the Message podcast. This is Ellie Dole, and I am sitting with Scott Chapman today.
Good to see you, Ellie.
It is good to see you on this beautiful, blustery spring morning.
Indeed.
We don't know what it's like outside. We're in an attic. But Scott, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Have you, you talk about being German a lot.
I do. I just as a way to help people know
Yes.
my origin story.
Have you ever researched your family history?
I have, actually.
Yeah. Tell me about what you've done in it.
A couple different things. We did an Ancestry.com thing a few years ago.
Yeah.
And I can trace, Germans are really good at record keeping, I have found out. And so there's a lot of things we don't do well, but we write stuff down. I could trace my family back to 1625.
Wow.
In Germany. And even there was an English branch, but they were German. My name, we also researched my name.
Okay.
The Chapman, which is actually an anglicized version of Kaufman.
Oh, okay.
And so that there was
a pretty German name.
a pretty German name. But 3/4 of my family names are Dosch
Okay.
and Cannell
Okay.
and Baker with 2 Ks. And so
Okay.
they were German.
Very
the,
German.
The 1/4 of my name that is English is Chapman, but it's an anglicized version of Germans who immigrated to England.
Interesting.
And so, so it's very interesting in that my family came to America in the 1700s.
Okay.
So we've been here a while, and others came in the late 1800s.
Okay. So fascinating.
Isn't that wild?
It is wild. So Blake's mom got us the Ancestry DNA swab kit, or
Yeah.
you spit in the jar for Christmas. And we sent it out a while back and just got our results yesterday. And so I am very English.
Okay.
Extremely English.
Now, I thought you would have gone Swedish.
I'm not.
Okay.
My hometown is very Swedish.
Okay.
Actually, is a Swedish colony.
Okay.
My hometown is, but I am very English, and then Lithuanian.
No way.
Isn't that fun?
That is Did you know that?
I did. I knew that part, and I didn't know how English I was, though. So my grandma, Jane, her parents are from Lithuania.
Okay.
And so I knew I had that, in my family history. And then there were some other, fun pieces. We're going to Norway this coming fall, and I'm 1% Norwegian,
There you
whereas
go.
Blake's 40% Norwegian.
There you
He's
go.
very Norwegian. But so it was really fun, but there was something in it when you get your results back, and I don't know if you've done, the
I did. I
thing.
did that, yeah. Mine was very boring.
Yeah. I also I was besides the Lithuanian, I feel a little bit boring, you know? There was something in it. I don't know if it's a new section or not, but it's called traits.
Okay.
And it analyzes your DNA.
Is it like personality traits?
And so it's
No way.
there's certain traits that you are more have a higher aptitude or whatever for based on your DNA.
I feel cheated now. I didn't
You
get
should
this.
go and see if it's updated in it or not, because I've heard they update it. But certain ones were apparently I'm more determined. That's part of my DNA.
I would have never thought that. I would have never thought that about you. No, I'm teasing.
And then I'm a morning person. Apparently that your DNA has something to do with that, which is true.
Okay.
And then there was something I'm not a nap taker, which is actually not true. I love naps. I don't take them right now in my life, but So it just got me thinking about this idea, and you talked about a story this weekend in your message. But there's so much to who we are.
Yeah, totally.
And going back to these traits that are in us, in our DNA, things that our DNA has been shaped and molded to become more a part of us.
Yeah.
And you're talking about in John 9. That's the passage that you went into this weekend, this man who was born blind.
Yes.
And around him are these people saying why is he the way that he is?
Yes.
And people are relating it to sin and all these other things. But my brain was just swirling with all of these thoughts of there's so much to our story.
I didn't have time to go into that question, but I think that is a question we ask a lot. Why are things the way they are? Why are we the way we are?
Yep.
And there's a lot of assumptions that I think we can put into a question like that. Mm-hmm. And the disciples put a lot of their assumptions in it, right? But we look at it and we say, why does the world work the way it works? particularly on the areas that we just think are crazy.
Right.
Or why wasn't I born more like this or like that? Mm-hmm. Why am I stuck with my body, or why am I stuck
Right.
in the circumstances in which I'm stuck? Or
Yeah.
why, we look at someone who just seems to have it all, and you're like, how did they fall into that?
Yeah.
And those are questions I think a lot of us ask. And I think Jesus' answer was remarkable. Mm-hmm. It was specific.
Yes.
And usually the answers in the Bible on that question are not specific.
Mm-hmm.
In this particular case, Jesus answered for the individual person.
Yeah.
And he didn't say why in general do these things happen, but why for this person, that God literally had a desire and a plan and a hope that not only for him to be healed, but for him to have a witness of being healed. Mm-hmm. And I think that when we try to answer that question, we either answer it with a simple God in a complex world, or a complex God in a simple world.
Yeah.
And I think a better answer is that we have a God who is morally simple, who's incredibly good.
So good.
And loves us, in a world that is fallen, broken, and complicated, and that we end up almost from the second we're born into massive complication.
Right.
And I think when we understand that, it gives a more generous view of that question. But I love, I don't think anybody expected Jesus to give that answer.
Yeah, I've read this passage multiple times.
Yeah.
Right. And when you specifically went through that line as you were reading it on Sunday, I was very taken back by it.
Yeah.
Where Jesus says, it's not because of sin.
Right.
That he is blind.
Right.
It's not because of his sin or his parents' sin.
Right.
But it's for the glory of God. And
Yep.
I think that, his words weren't exact to that, but to that nature, it's for the glory of God, so that God may be, do great things through him. But as I sat with this, my heart was like in this weird tension, right?
Yep.
Of like, do some people hear that and think, okay, so God caused him to be blind so that he could have glory from it? Or is God going to bring glory out of this terrible thing that has happened to this man?
Right.
And I think how you interpret that kind of matters, and it helps you understand the character of God a little bit. What do you think about that?
I do. And I think the language is wide enough that you could have either of those interpretations.
Right.
I think that, for me, it's more comforting to say that God looked at his blindness and said, I think I know what I can do with that.
Yeah, I think that way too.
I have room for people that have other thoughts on that. But I look at that and the question that it made me ask, which we didn't have time for.
Right. Which is why we have this podcast.
Is am I willing to take the hardest parts of myself and hand them to God?
Yeah.
Because sometimes I'm not. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I look at that and I think, man, this has been so painful or so hard. I just I can't go there with you.
Yeah.
I also think, what would have happened if he just didn't go to the pool and wash his eyes?
Right. Well, he would have been walking around with mud on his eyes for a while.
For a while. But there was a part that Jesus let him play in the story.
He had to do the part.
He had to go do it. And and we could argue it's a very small thing. Mm-hmm. But it was a necessary thing.
Yeah.
Because Jesus, in a sense, gave him something to do as his king.
Yeah.
And he did it.
Yeah. There's an obedience
There's an obedience piece to that. And I think that is really important. I also think the method that Jesus goes through is fascinating.
It's wild,
isn't it?
Yes.
And I don't think anybody sees this coming. Mm-hmm. And he does this thing, where he makes the mud pie, and there's a pool over there, which, again, you could have gone and gotten water.
Yeah. He
didn't. He could have come with a container of water back to the soil, made his mud pie from the water from that pool and done it, but he didn't. He is actually taking some part of himself and placing it in dirt, and he takes that and he brings creation out of it. And we've heard that story before.
Yes. I've never thought of that before.
It is exactly like what happens in Genesis.
Yeah.
He is recreating Genesis 1.
Yeah.
Where he is taking and forming, where God formed man out of dirt and put some part of himself in man, breathed into him.
That's so good.
And that's exactly what Jesus is doing here. Mm-hmm. And he's saying, I don't want the water from the pool. I want water from me. Mm-hmm. And I want you to receive something of me in you that will restore creation to you.
That's profound.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, isn't it?
It is really cool. I was thinking a lot about that piece as well. Like, why the spit? Why the mud? Because you see all these other healings in the New Testament and the Gospels,
right,
where he simply walks up and says, like, be healed, or like, get up and walk.
Or a woman grabs his coat.
Yeah, like literally there's not a lot that's involved in this. But in this particular story, like, there is so much involved that Jesus is doing that he's also asking the man to do.
Right.
And it's just like this beautiful picture of not everything with Jesus is, there's a process to it.
Right.
Like he is with us in a process
of
transformation. And I think what you brought in of the Genesis piece is like so profound, but there is this amazing, miraculous thing about him that there is some immediate transformation, right? When you meet him, like you see things anew and there's new life, but there's also this like longer process that you enter into with him that reveals more and more the more you're in it.
Totally. Well, the story ends with the man going back and finding Jesus.
Yeah.
And he is talking to Jesus about Messiah. Mm-hmm. And Jesus helps him understand that's who I am.
Yeah.
And his joy is made complete. Mm-hmm. And he believes him.
Yeah.
And I think there's a beauty in that. Jesus didn't tell him that the second he healed him. Mm-hmm. And I just think he was patient and let everything that he had planted ripen.
Mm-hmm. It was a very come and see moment.
It very much.
I mean, very much. The nature of the series called Come and See, it was a very much like Jesus does the thing, asks him into this posture of obedience. The man, is obedient, and Jesus he's bringing him into an experience with him.
Yeah.
He's not just giving him information about himself. He does eventually give him information like, I am this man, I am the Messiah, but it's an experience that he's inviting him into. And I think that's interesting. There's something else, in this whole story of the man where people were pretty adamant that it was sin that had caused his condition.
Yes.
Either his own sin or the sin of his parents. And as I thought about this man and the story, I thought about how many times he's probably heard that in his life.
Totally. It reminded me of Job. Mm-hmm. Job has this terrible thing befall him, not because he's sinful, but because he's righteous.
Yeah.
We know that because we see what unfolds in heaven in the first chapter of Job, but Job's friends don't.
Right.
And they come to him and they continue to insist that his sin is why all these bad things are happening to him, even though we know, in fact, that this is something that God is allowing him to be tested because he's been following God. And the enemy has accused him of only following God because God is good to him. Mm-hmm. And he is allowing, right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so in this, I look at this guy and I think of that. Mm-hmm. And I think all the people around you are imagining they know.
Right.
They're imagining that they know behind the cosmic curtain of how heaven works and why all these things have happened. And the reality is they don't.
Yeah.
They don't know.
Yeah, and I think about how as humans, when we hear something about ourselves so many times, we can begin to believe it ourselves.
Totally. Totally.
And how...
Have you ever had that?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a fairly outgoing person.
No way.
You know me pretty well now. But there's, I've been called loud. I've been called, all these things. Mm-hmm. And at some point when those are said with a certain sound behind them, a certain tone behind them, you begin to either think, wow, that's not a good thing.
Yeah.
And then you start to change your behavior accordingly.
Yeah.
Right. And I think we all have things like that in our lives that have been said about us, of people assume things. They assume they know the reality behind something,
Right.
or they, there's an offhand comment and then it becomes a narrative, and then that becomes your whole story.
Right.
And so I'm just thinking about this man who for his whole life has been blind. He's never known anything but blindness.
Right.
And for his whole life, he's been told it's his fault.
Right. How would that feel?
Awful.
It would feel absolutely awful.
Absolutely awful. And I just think about the pit.
And he lived in a city, Jerusalem, whose main function was the temple, which he could never go in.
Right.
Because he was blind, because they assumed it was sin, and because therefore he was unacceptable to God.
Yeah. And what a life.
What a life.
Like none, essentially.
Right.
And how wild is it that Jesus came
Right.
and changed his entire story?
Totally.
And I just think that's a powerful example for us to look at and just think about, one, the impact that we have on other people when we assume things
Totally.
About people, or when we create the narrative in our mind without becoming curious about a person,
Totally.
finding out more about a person, but also the power that Jesus has. What are the pieces like in your life? Like, have you had that experience?
Oh, yeah. I think being in public ministry,
Wild ride.
yeah, I think a lot of people, because we have a public side to our life, imagine that they know us in ways, and they don't. I think it's important to hold on to both curiosity and complexity. People should not be reduced to a simple narrative that we can say in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And the reality is their lives are more complicated than that. And there's things we all do well and we don't do well. There's parts of our life that we rebel against God, and there's parts that we really follow God deeply. There's things that happen to us that are hard to explain, and other things that are easier. And if we're not curious and ask people, and if we're don't allow them to disclose themselves over time, and if we're not willing to hold some degree of complexity of where you're not all good or all bad or all loud or all quiet or all whatever, but that there's reasons for that, I don't think we ever get to really know people.
Yeah. And I think it's also being curious and being a safe space for them to bring that information, because I think there's so many spaces, especially now in our society, where you can reveal something about yourself or your past or whatever it is.
Right.
And we live in a cancel culture where people are like, well, if that was you at any point in your life,
Right.
I'm done with you. It doesn't matter what Jesus has done. It doesn't matter what
Right.
you have done since then. Like, if
Right.
that was you at any point in your life,
Right.
I'm done with you.
And the thing that's amazing is the only people who can live in a culture like that are the people who are better at keeping secrets.
And what a pressure.
Yeah, because if we looked in every single human being's life hard enough and close enough, we would find disqualifying dynamics.
Yeah.
In their life that you would say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you said that when you were 16.
Yeah.
What were you thinking? And you might say, I was just trying to be cool. I was trying to fit in, and I didn't maybe even know or mean it too bad. I mean, I think that's cancel culture in a very, very real way, and I think that's challenging. I lived a terrible life before I was a Christian, and lots of dark pieces to that that I am not proud of, and that I feel very badly about. And that I have gone back to even people that I knew then and said, hey, I'm a different person now, and I'm very sorry for who I was then. And I think, do we have room for that?
Like, we would hope so.
Yeah.
But I think it's hard to determine yes or no in our culture. But I think that we, as the church, can, if we are committed to it, can continue to create a culture where that is safe and that is welcome.
Right.
Because there is a reality of where our story, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the miraculous, what
Right.
Jesus has done, what has only happened because of Jesus. We talked about that a little bit with like Matthew
Right.
and his tax collection. Like you don't go from being a tax
Right.
collector to a religious leader
Right.
without Jesus.
Right.
And we all have those pieces of our story, and those are what help other people come alive to God. And I think like
Yep.
you've discovered that as a leader of a church. The chapel went through a huge process of
Yeah.
trying to figure out people's stories, to
Yes.
figure out how do we as the church become a place, one, where every story is welcome
Totally.
and seen as valuable, but also like how do we actually help people see who Jesus is?
Totally. This was probably, 14 years ago. I don't know. I'm very bad at math on these things.
Yeah.
So that's
Time flies.
Yeah, exactly. I'm very bad at that. But yeah, we started realizing several things, and we started realizing that we were seeing less people really coming to Jesus than we had in the previous years of our church. We also realized that we were just seeing things happen in the congregation we didn't understand. And one of the things we just said is, why don't we ask people? And we just took time and attempted to find out and had curiosity.
Yeah.
And we also would just have multiple conversations because there's a lot of convenient answers that we give, right, on the front end of a conversation that is attempting to, in a sense, make the conversation either go away or feel better. Because I think if I were to have generous spirit in it, I think a lot of us don't want to hurt anybody. And so when the church comes to you and you're feeling like the church hasn't been doing the job it should do, you try to make us feel better about ourselves.
Right.
And the reality is we had to stay in the conversation long enough that people didn't.
Yeah.
And what we found was that people just said that their experience with God, not their knowledge of Scripture, not their even belief system, but their experience of God had not been deep enough or profound enough that they were willing to take relational risks in order to transfer that or to tell someone else about it.
Yeah.
And we had to take that seriously.
Yeah.
And we just started to ask a lot of questions about that. And that spurred us to realize that the faith that had so transformed us as leaders, we were not transferring.
Yeah.
And we had to own that. And we had to talk about that. And we had to be able to come before our people and say, hey, listen, we have to make some changes. And we have to shift as a church because not only are we not sharing our faith, but we're not experiencing something that's vital to faith.
Yeah.
And we had to figure that out. And it took us a couple years to try to really figure it out and be able to re-architect this thing. And it was not popular at the time in doing it either. And it was super challenging. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done.
Yeah.
But it was something where now I look at who our church is and I look at how we're seeing God move in that. And I'm deeply grateful. First of all, I'm deeply grateful for the people who are willing to tell us the truth.
Yeah.
Even that was hard. And I just want to say again, thank you to them. I also want to say thank you to a lot of our staff and our board for having the courage to hear it and being able to make changes. I just don't think that's very easy, and I'm grateful for them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's very brave, I think, and
Yeah.
I think it's important for the church to always be curious and continue to explore
Yep.
how to keep helping people
Exactly.
experience God in profound ways. Do you think we see this a lot in other parts of our society? It's a little bit of a tangent, but do you think there's a reality where people have become like desensitized to the reality of God? And
Sometimes, yeah.
who he is, or they don't understand how big he is, or like what is it that kind of puts up that wall there where it's like they don't see the fullness of the miraculous? Or
I think there's a couple things that I've noted anyway. I think that I call it being inoculated. Like if you want to inoculate you against like smallpox, right? You take a less virulent form of pox, usually cowpox, right? And you just being honest, and you give it to somebody, and they get a little sick, but then they never really get smallpox. And that was the first big inoculation. And if you get a less virulent form of Christianity, you're inoculated against the real thing.
yeah,
And I think that it is a lot harder to infect you in a sense with Jesus because you say, yeah, I did that. And I think that it can, if you've been around people that have really negatively impacted you in the name of Jesus, or if you've been around people who were kind of living two lives.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that can inoculate us.
Yeah.
I also think we can make choices inside our hearts that can inoculate us too.
Mm-hmm.
If our life hasn't gone in the way that we've wanted, and our disappointments, I think a lot of times we can just look at God and blame him.
Mm-hmm.
And in that blame, we can kind of close our hearts off.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of ways to get to a place. But there's only one way out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's to deeply experience Jesus.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we've attempted. And by that, I don't mean in a necessarily a sensationalistic way,
right.
but in a way that is meaningful to us.
Right.
And, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's the reality of the goodness of God too. Is when we talk about experiencing Jesus, and you're saying like not in a sensational way, like it doesn't
Right.
have to be that way. But I think that if we look back through the Bible and we look back through Old Testament and even New
Right.
Testament narratives, like God is such a personal God.
Yes.
And people experience him in extremely personal ways.
Right.
And it's almost like there's reality of like how Moses experienced God and how Abraham experienced God. Like Abraham couldn't have experienced God in Moses' way because it wouldn't have meant as much
Right.
to Abraham as it did to Moses. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Exactly.
And like for this blind man, there was something about Jesus' interaction with him that was different than the interaction that Jesus had with the man who was lowered through the roof and couldn't walk, because Jesus knows these people and he
Right.
knows their story. And I think that's it gives us a picture of the power of story too,
Yes.
and how each one of us has, whether we've encountered Jesus or not, a personal story.
Yeah.
But once we've encountered Jesus and he becomes part of our story, our unique story has a unique power.
Yes.
Would you say that?
I would. You said something that I thought was really good. You talked about how Jesus was looking to heal this man, but you were also saying that he was looking to heal his story.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I think that there is a reality of you touched on it at the beginning when we were opening, of the moment we come into this world,
Yep.
right? We're surrounded by chaos.
Right.
Because that's the world we live in,
Right.
is chaos. And I think throughout our entire lives, we encounter chaos.
Yep.
And we encounter it in the forms of sin of other people.
Yeah.
We encounter it in human interaction. We encounter it in just the world that's happening around us, the news, like what's
Yeah.
going on in my town, what are my friendship interactions,
Right.
like all of these are imperfect.
Right.
There's nothing perfect
Right.
in our lives, and each of these things has a unique impact on us as a person. And so I think it's normal that throughout our journey, throughout our life, that we have these moments of impact
Right.
that have happened to us along the way. And those moments of impact shape us. And they shape how we respond to different things. They shape how we engage with people. They shape our thoughts, like we talked about with the man. They shape so much of us.
Right.
And like I talked about in my story a little bit, they can shape us negatively. They can
Right.
cause us to become less of who we actually were created to be.
Right.
They can cause us to shrink back. They can cause us to become angry people. They can cause
Totally.
us, all of these interactions have an impact. And I think there's this moment when you come alive to God, you experience him in this initial way.
Yeah.
That is amazing and miraculous. But I think there's an invitation of, one, he's looking forward with us
Right.
into a future reality. And he's saying, hey, like from this moment on, let me be the lens for your story. Let me be the lens for your life. Let me be the lens
Right.
that shapes all these impacts, that shields you in these impacts, that holds you in these impacts. But then I think there's another invitation from him to look back.
Right.
And to say, hey, let's look back at all these places in your life.
Yep.
And I want to show you where I was in that.
Right.
I want to show you who you were created to be in that, actually.
Right.
I want to show you like how I felt about that. And I've had the opportunity to do some story work
Yeah.
over, the last couple of years. And when I do that, when I actually look back at different places in my story where I felt alone, where I felt ashamed, where I felt hurt, even where I felt excited, right? Or good, where I asked Jesus where he was in that.
Mm-hmm.
So much healing happens.
Yes.
Because it's often, when I was weeping, he was too.
Yeah.
And he shows me that. Or like when I was afraid, he's holding me. Like he shows me like, this is who I've been all along, and I'm there. And like, there's an opportunity of like, yeah, these things, it doesn't make them not real.
Yes.
Those things are still very, very real in your life.
Right.
But there's an opportunity to say, okay, Jesus, now like show me the way out of this and into the way of life that you had for me.
Right.
And sometimes that's forgiveness.
Right.
Sometimes that is releasing bitterness, which can, come from forgiveness.
Totally.
Sometimes it's exploring deeper and deeper those moments with him. But I just think that there's an opportunity to heal the story. And I saw that in this story of the man, when he like brings his parents into the story too.
Yes.
They become part of it because our parents are a part of our story.
Absolutely. And they were part of the story because everybody thought they sinned.
Exactly. And I'm like, not only is this man carrying shame, but his parents are carrying shame.
Exactly.
And they're probably like, I don't really know what we did, but apparently we did something.
Right.
But how healing to see Jesus in that moment. And I think like as a parent, how can you relate to that?
Totally.
Like it's powerful.
Totally. I look back at my own story too, and I think that as God enters that story, and as you said, as he goes backwards, it's also the lies that I believed.
That's
about myself, about the world. Did I deserve this?
Yep.
Was I, just someone who, gravitated to darkness in some ways. And the reality is when you go back and he re-explains a lot of this to you, you do have work to do because there are parts of yourself where you're like, that was not great. Right. And you have to be able to say, why did I do that? And what was it about that drew me?
Right.
But there's other parts about it that he also is like, yeah, that wasn't true. And what people said or what you heard, or that's not true. And let me tell you what is true. And the truth has a way of unlocking our past and unlocking the feelings that we've held on to for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And I just think there's a lot of power in that. Story holds power for us.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big deal.
Yeah. How do you talk to people who are either new to Christianity, new to following Jesus, or haven't ever really told their story before?
Yeah.
How do you help them understand how to tell their story? It's hard.
It is. And and honestly, I think that most people have a tendency to not tell a story at all.
Yes.
So that usually they err on the side of nobody really wants to hear this. And I don't really have much of a story to tell, and they because so much of the time in Christianity we tell unbelievably dramatic stories.
Yeah.
And
we really do.
We do. We really do. And
God started it with the Bible.
He did.
It's very dramatic.
But I also would argue there's an awful lot in the Bible that's relatively mundane.
Yeah.
That we don't gravitate to near as much as the stories that are not.
Yeah.
And I think that that's probably a challenge on our part. But I think people just feel like I don't have something to say. And the reality is you absolutely have something to say.
Yeah.
People's lives are intensely interesting to other people. And to be able, particularly somebody who's thought about their life and is able to tell their story in a way that allows them to share Jesus' story in their story. I think that's very interesting to people. And particularly the more relatable it is, the more granular, the more cracks and crevices that it has. And when we polish over that, I don't think it's actually helpful. I think it's not as real for people. And that's why this past weekend I wanted to just share a 30-second version of my story.
Yeah.
And I don't think it needs to be long, particularly if it's going to be conversational. I don't think anybody wants to hear the 25-minute version of my story.
Yeah.
I don't hold that imagination. But I think people, if you share a 30-second version, people ask questions about it. And then you can begin to hone in on the questions. And you can find out what they're going through.
Yes.
And you can find out where their heartbreaks are and where their excitement is, or what their dreams and hopes are. And you can begin to help blend their story into your story, into Jesus' story in a conversation, and bring it back to, would you ever think about just being open to who Jesus is? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the whole point of the story is openness.
Yeah.
Would you ever check it out? Would you ever ask questions? Would you ever explore it? Mm-hmm. And I think people are amazed to find out how many people would. Mm-hmm. And actually have some degree of interest in that. If it's a real process, if it's genuinely something that is safe and won't hurt them.
Yes.
I think that's a big deal.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point in that I think our stories are even most powerful in conversation.
Yep.
Like when you're sitting down relating to someone,
right,
when you're seeing them, when you're talking to them. Because I think, one, it makes us, as the people who are sharing our story, not feel like we have to have a presentation prepared.
Exactly.
Exactly. It's not like you have to walk in a room and be like, this is how I found Jesus.
Right, exactly.
Day one. But you get to sit and you get to talk to someone and unpack those moments of your life. And it also gives them, as you're talking, the opportunity for them to consider, oh, that's kind of like me.
Yes.
And that's powerful, where people can find in your story.
Totally.
That was kind of like me.
Can I unpack two stories for you? Mm-hmm. In my early Christianity, my first year of being a Christian, I had two different sharing your faith moments.
Okay.
The one, I was at a church, and they did this thing called Evangelism Explosion. I don't know if you've ever heard that or not.
I haven't. It sounds wild.
D. James Kennedy. And what you did was you would literally memorize, I think it was 100 verses.
Okay.
Anybody that was new to the church, whether they were Christian or not, you didn't ask them. You went to their house unannounced on Tuesday, knocked on the door, came in, and you presented the gospel, and in a way that was completely memorized, with all these Bible passages, and the goal was to make sure that they were a Christian, and if they weren't, that you would debate them or argue them into submission.
Sounds like a super strategy.
It was. There was a couple dozen of us that did this, and I did it for a year with this team, and not one person came to Christ. And at the same time, I was having a different experience. Mm-hmm. In my first year of Christianity, in the school, the medical school that I was a part of, where everyone knew my story, and everybody knew who I was, I would take my Bible and read it at lunch.
Wow.
And I would literally, to people that were just around me, I'm say, hey, you got to look at this. Mm-hmm. I just read this. I've never read the Bible before. I read this. What do you think it means? Mm-hmm. And I would just hand it to them and say, I'm really trying to figure this out. What do you think it means? And they would either postulate ideas, in even though they didn't know either, or we'd strike up a conversation. And I would take them to a Bible study I was a part of. And I've shared about this Bible study before. We were at a professor's house, and there was hundreds of young people at this. And that was an unbelievably powerful place if I could take people. And I knew if they experienced that type of Christianity, they wouldn't become a Christian that night, but they would have curiosity.
Yeah.
And it would be drawing. They'd meet a lot of people whose lives were kind of messy, about their age, about in the situations that they were in, all of us trying to grapple with this person named Jesus. Mm-hmm. And there was something really compelling about that. And nobody was trying to debate or argue them into anything. It was more of, I'm trying to figure this out. Does that have interest for you?
Right.
And we saw hundreds of people come to Christ.
That's awesome.
And so we also started a Bible study on my campus with a few other people. And I was a minor player in that because I was the youngest Christian and was not trusted with lots of responsibility, and rightly so. But in that, I also we saw more than 40 people come to Christ on a medical school campus who went to medical school.
That's amazing.
It was. And in that, the thing that it taught me was that really seeing people come to Christ is a natural process. It's a relational process. It is something that shouldn't become systematic, organizational, or unnatural.
Yeah.
And it's no different than making a new friend. It's no different than going on a date with somebody.
Yeah.
It's no different than all these. It's a relational dynamic where you allow people to become themselves and be comfortable with themselves. Ask hard questions in a space where they're loved and accepted.
Yeah.
And I think it's super important. That's why inviting people to church really matters, or inviting them into a small group really matters, because if we're the entire Jesus block in their life, that's so much responsibility.
100%.
And it is so hard to do.
Yes.
Where if we can have people join us in environments where Jesus is represented well and they're going to be loved well, and they can ask questions without fear, and people can encourage them, it just helps so much.
Yeah. Yeah, there's one word that comes to my mind as you share that, and it's authenticity.
Yeah.
Like, we as humans crave authenticity.
Right.
We want it. And I think that in this world and age of AI,
Right.
especially now more than ever,
Right.
authenticity matters.
Totally.
And you authentically being who you are, sharing how your journey, sharing the, where you've come from and where you are now and what Jesus is currently doing,
Right.
is powerful. And it is, people can see it. People
Totally.
can spot authenticity from a
Totally.
mile away, and they're drawn to it.
Totally.
They are attracted to it. But I think to what you were talking about, as far as community, I think there's also a reality of you said we can't be the only Jesus to this
Right.
person. One, we want them to really encounter the true Jesus,
Right.
for himself. But there's also this reality of the beauty of God's people.
Yes.
And each of us having our own unique story, right? Of at every stage of our Christian journey, we need community around us.
Right.
Because different people are going to help us see God differently.
Totally.
And the unique things about him that they've come to know themselves.
Totally.
You show me things that are different than Jamie shows me, than, the other people around me. And I think that it's us having that diversity of perspective and experience with God is so important to a believer.
Totally. And even on one particular day.
Yeah.
Like it could be somebody else next week and
Yeah.
a third person the week after that. And I do think that. And I think it's important, just as a personal relationship with God is important, personal relationship with other Christians is important too. And it just gives a richness and a vibrancy to faith that you can't get kind of on your couch.
Yeah. Yeah. And it really does. It's so important. I think that so much of my personal journey and transformation has happened outside of church with God, with personal relationships, but inside the church too, surrounded by a beautiful community of people who are genuinely interested and invested in helping me know Jesus more. And that has been so pivotal at so many points in my life. But I think it also illustrates the importance of the invitation piece that you shared this weekend, of that quick 30-second invitation. How do you go from your dinner table with someone like we talked about last week to church? Right. Because church is still important.
Totally. And that's why I was sharing this week, and I got a lot of comments on this. And so it was a lot of fun. But I remember teaching my son how to ask someone on a date and be kind, be real, and be brief. Yeah. And the reality is if you're super kind and you have, if there's been a sense of where you're just being authentic and real with who you are, and you also stop and allow them to actually have a real choice in the midst of it. And that's why the 10-second ask I have found is a very easy way to do it. It's just, hey, we're going to church. We're going to grab some lunch afterwards. We really like you. We really enjoy being with you guys so much. Would you come and hang out with us? Yeah. And it's really enough. That does it. There doesn't have to be lots of reasons given. There doesn't have to be big explanations. There doesn't have to be lots of other things tacked onto it. Yeah. And I think people would be amazed, and people have a good experience.
Yeah. And like you said, 80% of people who are invited, which is a crazy statistic.
I remember inviting a childhood friend to our church. And they were in town. And I was really nervous about it because that person knew me. And I knew there'd be a lot of curiosity.
Yeah.
But I also, and I just asked them, and I will never, I was so worried about it. But I remember talking to their wife on the backside, and these are people who had never been to church, I mean, maybe since they were kids.
Yeah.
And she just said, I don't know what happened to me. And I'm like, well, what happened? And she just said, I just started to cry.
Thank you, Jesus.
And I'm like, why do you think you did that? I don't have the slightest idea. But I just felt like I was loved. And nobody really, I wasn't talking to anybody. Now, she didn't understand, but the presence of God was at work.
Right.
And I think that so much of my fears or my insecurities about myself or whatever in that were eclipsed in the fact, wow, God, you're actually here.
Yeah.
You care about these people more than I do. You're involved in this. You're going to make a way.
Yeah.
And if they're open at all, you're going to be there for them.
Yeah.
And I just think that is helpful to me to remember.
It is. And I think it reminds me of, in relation to our story, when we share our story, it doesn't have to do all the work either.
No.
Right?
No.
Like,
I used to think that.
yeah, same. Right?
And yeah, and there was so much pressure on that.
Yes.
And I there's a lot of my story I don't tell.
Tell me about that.
There's some real dark parts of my life that were there that I don't think are for everybody or is even helpful.
Yeah.
For everybody. And there's parts of my testimony I would never tell until my mom and dad passed away.
Yeah.
Because I thought it would hurt them. And there's parts of my testimony that some of my kids don't know.
Yeah. Now they're going to want to know.
They are. That's too bad. No. But there are dark parts of my life that were transformed by God, and they're genuinely a powerful part of my story. But for people who are in that, that's a conversation point.
Right.
You can ask me about that, or I can ask you about that, and we can talk about that if that's a real thing for you.
Right.
But I don't have to share it with everybody because it's not something, and it becomes a thing on its own.
Our story doesn't need to be a spectacle.
It doesn't. It doesn't. I agree with that. I really agree with that.
Yeah.
I think I used to feel too much pressure in sharing my story, and I used to also feel like the dramatic parts of what God had did was the biggest parts of the story.
Right.
They're really not. The biggest parts of the story are that God has shown up at all.
Yeah.
And that he's relational and he's real and I can know him. And I think I learned that over time. And I have seen my story be used by God more. The shorter it has been and the less sensational it has been in that. And it's been interesting to me.
That is so interesting. I think there's something about the humility in that God loves. You know, of like, hey, God, I just my story is also like an offering to him.
Right.
Of like, honestly, it's his story too.
Right.
Because it's what he's done in my life. And
Totally.
I relate to you. Like there's, there was a season in my life that I didn't think I had a story.
Right.
I grew up in the church.
Right.
My dad was a pastor when I was like middle school, early high school. I grew up, going to summer camp, loved Jesus in 5th grade.
Which, can I just say, that is a great story.
It's a great story. But at that time, I was like, I don't have a story because I wasn't
in a gang. I didn't go to prison.
Yeah, I was in a rock and roll band, but that gets a little bit later on in the story. So there was a period of my life where I didn't have a story, but I did have a story. I just needed to recognize it. And then there was a period of my life where I had walked away from Jesus, essentially, and having him be an active part of my life. And I look back on that part of my life, and there are certain parts that I don't share with everyone. Again, if it comes down to a conversation point and I'm, in a discipleship conversation with someone and I want to help them see the reality of transformation of Jesus, I will share those parts. And then, now it's like, Lord, I just humbly submit this to you for you to use. And he'll lead you to share different parts of your stories at different times.
Totally. That's exactly right.
And that's really beautiful. But it is an offering.
It's interesting. There's a term I heard someone use. You have to become fluent in your own story. And I thought, wow, that's a weird way to say that.
Yeah.
But it's true. You it's like speaking a language. If you become fluent in your story, you can tailor it to the people around you, not in an inauthentic way, but in a very authentic way.
Right.
And be able to just realize, there are some certain things I might highlight for you because I think that might be helpful for you. And there are other things I might not, because it might not be helpful for you. It's not about me expressing myself, but it's about me connecting with someone else.
Yeah, that's really good. We should write that on a T-shirt or something.
We should, man.
Yeah, on a notebook. I think that's also something that's so powerful about the man in John 9.
Yes.
Like he's got like a one sentence.
Yes, I love it.
I was blind,
right,
but now I see.
Yeah.
And as you were talking about this weekend, I just wrote in my notebook, I was blank, but now I blank.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we can all consider.
Yeah.
Like what in that one sentence, what is our story? Mm-hmm. What would yours be?
In one sentence?
Yeah, like I was blank, but now I'm blank.
I think I would say I was hopeless. Mm-hmm. And now I have hope.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
I think mine, at a period of my life, I'm very classic, like I was lost.
Yeah.
But now I'm found. And I think that we can all explore our story. And like, that's a good place for people to start, right?
Yeah, I think it really is.
What's this one sentence?
Yeah.
And then from there, for this man, it opened up questions like you talked about earlier.
Right.
Like, what? Tell me about this man. Tell me about, like, who is he, But for us, it could also open questions of curiosity for us to explore our own story.
Totally.
And become fluent in our story so that then we can share it with others.
And it also really impacts us. Like I was thinking, I remember the first time I ever really personally encountered God. Mm-hmm. I was at a Christian retreat, and I had absolutely zero expectations for this thing.
Yeah.
And I just started crying, and I hadn't cried since I was 7 years old.
Wow.
And I was horribly embarrassed.
Wow.
Horribly, horribly embarrassed. And I got up and I left the room because I did not want to have anybody see me cry. Mm-hmm. And I could not stop crying. Mm-hmm. And I was I just confused. Mm-hmm. And I could not override it. And I was outside in this backyard where the retreat was being held inside. And it led me to call out to God. Mm-hmm. And basically say, why am I doing this? And it was the first time I started to really hear from God.
Wow.
And I remember God was beginning to just say, you have a lot of pain, mm-hmm. and there's a lot that has happened, mm-hmm. that you have never mourned or never gotten out. Mm-hmm. And you don't know how to do it.
Right.
And that was the beginning. There was no solution given, by the way.
God has a way of doing that.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there was no solution given, but it was enough that I felt like I had connected with God for real. And there was a moment where he knew my life. And there was a moment where there was something that was more than I'd known. And that just started a process. Mm-hmm. And I think when we remember those moments, mm-hmm. it's good for us too.
It is.
And you can remember back and you're like, yeah. Sometimes what's weird too is Christians can, when they mature and grow in Christ, can forget who they were.
Yes.
And you can look down on people who are not they're not living the life you're living right now.
Yep.
And I think it's good to remember back to who we were. Paul does a lot of that work in his epistles. Yeah. He'll say, remember when you were this.
Yeah.
And I think there's, that can happen to any of us, but mm-hmm. in that it's helpful for us to remember and not be haughty, mm-hmm. and be able to look at the people around us who are grappling for the most basic things and fumbling it.
Yeah.
And to have compassion on that and to have patience with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just going to say, I feel like Jesus would tell us that. form compassion
Yep.
in us. I think as you were talking, it made me think of one other thing for new believers in particular. I think that there's an excitement to share your story, and it's okay if you just share it like this man did.
Yep.
One sentence.
I agree.
But to also just like, you don't have to have it all figured out at the beginning.
Right.
You don't have to have the whole of your story figured out at the beginning.
No.
And to truly enter into that process with Jesus of going, like you said, going back and looking at those places with him and just taking that time with him.
Right.
I think that's like such a sacred time to truly do that. And I think throughout our lives, more things come up, right? And you have to go back again, or you have to go back and explore or uncover, dig up some stuff that he wants to work through with you. And he's going to do that forever and ever, I think.
Yep.
But I think it's important for like people to know, like, you don't have to rush it.
You don't. And I also think people are different. And I think there are, like, I'm an introvert. Mm-hmm. You're not.
Yeah.
and I think that's going to feel different.
Yeah.
And I think it's okay.
Absolutely.
I also think that when people are coming to Christ, it's messy. Mm-hmm. And the first year or so after they've come to Christ is really messy. Mm-hmm. And I think people can have this massive rush up to having somebody make a pledge of faith. Mm-hmm. But then imagine that messy is over. And it's really, really, really not.
It's really not.
And they'll go backwards and then forwards again.
Yeah.
And that's what most of us do.
Yeah.
Because God will bring up things in our lives. And sometimes that's really easy, and other times it's really hard.
Right.
And when the hard hits, people may stop or hesitate.
Yeah.
And we need to have a category for that. We need to have a way of walking with them in that doesn't alarm them or freak us out. Mm-hmm. We just need to understand that this is a hard walk for all of us.
Yeah.
And that all of us have had to figure that out. And all of us have hesitated.
Yeah.
I mean, I certainly have.
Yeah.
There are points in my life where I'm like, I'm not sure I want to do this.
Yeah.
And I might want to be a Christian, but I don't want to be a Christian doing this.
Right.
And
I'll put the Jesus fish on my car.
Exactly.
That's
I'll wear the T-shirt,
Yeah.
but I'm not going to do this.
Yeah.
And which of course in that moment means that God's going to enter that thing more and more and more. But it's I think it's helpful for us to remember these things and to be gentle and gracious with people as they're going through it.
Yeah.
Because it's hard.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to do.
Yeah. And I think that's where, going back to, the table comes into play again, right? Like there's this like community thing, right? Where, that's where we stop and we see people. Right. And we really see them and we give them space to be seen.
Totally.
And heard and loved and known and all of those things. But always like in this ecosystem of what God is doing in his church and in his people and out in his community. Totally. I think. We have an exciting opportunity at Easter for people actually to share their stories.
Awesome. Tell me about that.
Yeah, we're launching a platform called Story Prompt across our campuses. Wow. And so at your campus, wherever you are, and we'll have online as well, there's going to be a link, a QR code that you'll see for you to share your story. And what you do is you click into it, you scan it with your phone, and it pulls up this platform where you can record a video, actually.
Wow, no way.
Of your testimony, whatever portion of your testimony you want to share. And the question is, where have you seen the evidence of God in your life recently?
Oh, that's great.
And so I think this is a great opportunity for us as a church to step into the power of story. And because what we can do with that then is to share those little glimpses of God's goodness, of the evidence of him at work in our lives with each other, at our campuses, in our ministries, at your Momco meeting. And it will help us all come alive to God in new and exciting ways.
What it reminds me of is like one of those great stained glass windows in a church where every story is like a piece of glass, and together all of our stories show who Jesus is.
That's beautiful.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah. So I'm excited. If you're, I hope everyone's considering joining us for Easter. If you're not, this is your invitation. Consider this your invitation. We really like hanging out with you.
There you go.
So come hang out with us on Easter.
And again, I just want to tell you, if God is laying actually, I know God is laying people on your heart.
Yeah.
Invite them to come with you.
Yeah.
Take the opportunity. Get over the fears or insecurities. You don't have to have it all cleaned up. You just need to be able to say, hey, man, we'd love to have you here because you really matter to us, and we love hanging out with you. Mm-hmm. Come to Easter with us.
Come to Easter. I love that. And so you can find service times for all of our campuses for Easter at chapel.org/Easter.
There you go.
Go there, find service times, invite a friend, invite your neighbor, someone who you love hanging out with, and we will see you there. We'll see you this Sunday first,
yes.
but in a couple Sundays for
right.
Easter.
That's right.
Sounds good. Fun to hang out today.
Go ahead. Indeed.